Take a moment to think about your last group project. Was it an enjoyable experience? Have you had an unpleasant group project experience either at school or at work in the past? If so, then social loafing is likely the cause or at least a contributor to your dissatisfaction. Ringelmann, an agricultural engineer, was actually one of the first to document the difficulties involved in group work. This was back in the 1880s. Ringelmann discovered that the product of group coordinated action was less than what we would expect. So, for instance, let's say that we have 3 men who can each pull 100 pounds. Now, if we combine these 3 men into a group, then our expectation would be that together, combining their strength, they should be able to pull something that weighs 300 pounds. Okay? But what Ringelmann found was that when you combined these 3 individuals together, that yes, the overall product would be more than what any individual alone could accomplish. But it wasn't the 300 pounds that we would expect in this particular example. And so combined, these 3 men may be able to pull 270 pounds. So yes, 270 pounds is more than the 100 pounds that a single man could pull, but it isn't the overall outcome that we would expect based on their individual capacity. And so this loss of 30 pounds, right, 270 versus the 300 that we would expect, this is often called a process loss in the group or teamwork literature. And so we can think about some possible explanations for this process loss. Why is this group of 3 individuals not performing to their full capacity? Why do we have this loss of output? Here, this 30 pounds. And so Ringelmann measured, as in our example, the amount of force exerted on pulling a rope, found that as the group size increased, overall force increased, right, collectively, but individual contribution decreased. And so we could have a number of plausible explanations. One explanation is difficulty with coordinating efforts. So in our above example, if each of these 3 men had difficulty in combining their efforts in the context of a group. So for instance, if they each pulled in slightly different directions or at slightly different times, then perhaps we have a process loss due to the difficulties involved in coordinating the efforts of multiple people simultaneously. And it's likely that you've experienced that in the context of your own group work, right? That as you're working with various other students that may have different schedules and different responsibilities, that it was extremely difficult to coordinate the tasks and communication and find a time for you all to meet together, and that you had a lot of difficulty with coordinating your efforts. But a more social psychological explanation is that we may see a loss in the context of the group of individual effort or motivation, that beyond just simple coordination loss, that we may have a psychological phenomenon occurring in which individual members within the context of the group are exerting less effort. Right? So they're not trying as hard when their efforts are pooled in a group compared to when they are working individually. Ringelmann's results were just sort of out there with these questions left unanswered. And it was almost 100 years before social psychologists came along to renew interest in this phenomenon. Ingram in 1974 sought to tease apart these two separate explanations for the process loss. Is it coordination, or is it a loss in motivation and effort? And so in order to accomplish this, we have one of our kind of classic social psych style tricks. So we have here male college students who are engaging in sort of a tug-of-war task. So again, very similar to our hypothetical example and the research of Ringelmann, we're looking at weight pulled. And so here we have a device that measures the amount of force with which an individual pulls on a rope. And so it's presented as sort of this tug-of-war style task. And male college students are led to believe that they are pulling on this rope with a group of others. So they have a whole team of people with them that are pulling on this rope and this device that will measure the force with which they pull. Now, our real naive participant is always in the front for measurement. And 4 people line up behind him, and we say, ready, set, go. Our real naive participant is in the front, so when we say go, he starts to pull the rope, but behind him are 4 Confederates rather than 4 real participants, and they just stand there passively, right? So they're not actually exerting any force on the rope. And so what we have here is a pseudo group, right? A fake group. And so if we compare in this particular condition, our male college student's force that he exerts when he believes that he's in a group compared to in the individual test trial. So we measure the amount of force that he pulls individually, and we compare that to this particular context where he thinks that he's in a group, but he's not really. Then if there's any difference, it has to be due to social loafing. It has to be due to a loss of effort and motivation. It can't be because of a difficulty in coordination, because there's no coordinated effort. He's just led to believe that he's pulling on the rope with others, but the people behind him are not actually pulling on the rope, right? They're just standing there. And so what Ingram found was that there was a difference between the individual performance and the pseudo group performance. So being led to believe that we are pooling our efforts in the context of a group to complete a shared goal led to a decrease in effort, right? And so that process loss could not be explained by difficulties with coordination. We have a similar setup with Latney and colleagues in 1979. Here we have a slightly different task, again to demonstrate that we don't believe that this is specific to the context of physical tasks like weightlifting or pulling on a rope or exerting physical force, that we think that this is a more broad phenomenon that could extend to cognitive or other types of tasks. Here we have a pretty unique task, cheering. So we have 6 subjects that are seated in a semicircle, wearing blindfolds and headphones. So the setup would look something like this. The headphones are blasting noise of people clapping and cheering so that our participant could not hear the other people in the room. Our participant is told to clap and cheer as loudly as they can. right? And they're told, don't be embarrassed or anything because no one else in the group is going to be able to hear you or see you. They're blindfolded. They have these headphones blasting noise at them as well. And you're going to clap and cheer as loud as you can. And our participant is randomly assigned to one of four conditions. So they are told, you are the only person in this room, in this group of 6, who is going to be clapping and cheering. But again, don't worry, they're blindfolded, they have the headphones. But you alone are going to be yelling and clapping as loud as you can. Or they're told, you and one other person in the group, you and 3 other people in the group, or the entire group of 6. So you and all the other 5 people in this room are going to be yelling and clapping as loud as you can. Now, as it turns out, this is a little bit of a trick because only 1 out of these 6 subjects is a real naive participant. The other 5 are Confederates. And so, in all of these conditions, regardless of what the participant is told, they are the only ones who are clapping and yelling. And again, they don't know that because they have blindfolds and headphones. But they are the only ones clapping and cheering. And so, what we're actually testing is the perceived size of the group. And so there are devices in the room to measure the volume with which the participant claps and yells. And we're looking to see is there a difference between when they're led to believe that they are alone versus when they are led to believe that they are cheering and clapping with others. And do we see a difference across the various perceived group size? Now, all participants guess that they would be louder with other people, right? And this kind of makes sense. You would think that other people would be kind of disinhibiting, right? That I could feel free to be louder if there are other people doing the same thing as me. But in fact, Latne and colleagues found a social loafing effect even with cheering and clapping. And it's exactly as we would predict, that when they were led to believe that they were cheering and clapping alone, they were the only person making noise, they were louder, they produced more sound than when they believed that other people in the room were clapping and cheering along with them. So we see that as the group size increased, the perceived group size increased, the individual effort and the volume of our participant decreased. So our participant is socially loafing, is exerting less effort, has less motivation, even with something as simple as clapping and yelling. And so imagine what happens in the context of your difficult group projects in class. So what are some explanations? Why do people see this decrease in motivation? Why do they put forth less effort in the context of a group compared to when they are working individually? One core explanation is that people may feel less accountable for their actions. So essentially that when we pool the resources within a group, when we pool efforts, that an individual may feel that their efforts are more dispensable, less essential to achieving the overall group goal, and that they could engage in social loafing. They could slack off and still reach their desired ultimate outcome. Right? So they're basically thinking, I don't have to work as hard. I could conserve, my resources, devote my attention elsewhere, etc. I don't have to work as hard, and I can still get the outcome that I want because other people will pick up the slack for me. And the larger the group size, the more I could do this without being noticed. Right? So if we're all pooling our efforts together, I could not put forth as much effort, and no one will really notice because it's all going to get kind of mixed up in the same pot, right? So essentially they're doing it because it's what is easiest, and they believe that they can get away with it in the context of the group and still achieve that ultimate outcome that they desire, because other people will pick up the slack and put forth more effort to compensate for their lack of effort. And so we really see this in instances in which social loafing does not occur within the context of a group project. And so social loafing does not occur when individual efforts are individually evaluated. So this would be an example of a group project that is divided into individual tasks that are assigned to each group member. Right? So if each person is responsible for an identifiable part of the overall outcome, then it could be very clear that when we see a piece missing, oh, well, that was Bob. So clearly Bob engaged in social loafing because his part is the part that is missing. Right? So individual efforts can be identified and pulled out of the group, right, for individual evaluation. We see social loafing is less likely to occur when the task is appealing or important or challenging. And important and challenging comes into play with how dispensable we perceive our individual effort to be. If it's a very challenging task, we may think, well, I can't engage in social loafing because this task is so challenging that the group can't accomplish it without me, right? Without all of us pitching in to our full potential. And we're less likely to see social loafing when the group is perceived as important to the individual or as highly cohesive. So if the group is highly valued, then the individual may be less likely to engage in social loafing because it would hurt that valued group, and it may hurt interpersonal relationships that that individual has within the context of the group. And kind of continuing from that, research, more than 150 studies suggest that social loafing is more likely among men. So women are less likely to engage in social loafing. And the explanation that is endorsed is that women may be more likely to perceive the group as important and to value the group and the interpersonal relationships within the context of the group, which would then make them less likely to engage in social loafing. And the same for results that suggest that interdependent or collectivistic cultures are less likely to engage in social loafing. So again, the group is seen as more valuable, and so they're less likely to engage in social loafing.